By far the most important and confusing topic for the last 2 or 3 years now has been the inspections and repairs that condominiums have to go through. And we are lucky because we have somebody here today from our sponsor Rimkus who is going to help make sense out of all these new confusing laws. So let me welcome to the show Iqbal Ahmed from Rimkus. Welcome to the show, Iqbal. Thank you so much for coming today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
We really appreciate it.
He's really needed these days.
Oh man, is he needed.
The Rimkus people are really
Absolutely. Okay, so on that note, tell us a little about yourself and your qualifications.
Sure. I am a practice leader with the Construction Science Group at Rimkus Consulting. I am a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida and New York. I have about 15 years of experience in building restoration, construction, and consulting. And as of recent, since the passing of SB4D, my primary focus has been the structural milestone inspections and the structural integrity reserve studies.
Okay, so we have the man. We have
You're
the
the
man
man.
here.
Have
You're
you?
the guy.
Is your phone ringing off the hook?
It is.
It is. Yeah, I don't doubt that for a second. Just with confusion alone, quite frankly. You know,
right.
there's just so many questions. So as we know, condominiums 3 stories tall, even smaller in Dade and Broward. There's
Right.
a lot of people in Dade and Broward think, well, wait a minute, I'm not 3 stories. This doesn't affect me. It does. Totally different standards in Dade and Broward. They got to go through phase 1, phase 2 inspections. In Dade and Broward, they call them recertifications. And in Dade and Broward, actually, it's even for electrical too, not just structural. But
Wow.
what are the challenges that you see? We see there's so much confusion as it is because we are here in Broward County. But what are the challenges that you're dealing with, the ones that you're focusing in on when you're at Rimkus? What are the challenges you're being hit with?
As you mentioned, Dade and Broward operate on their own rules and regulations which are more stringent than the Florida statute. The challenges there for those 2 counties specifically is meeting the deadlines, which are shorter than what the statute states. Essentially, they have 90
Really?
days to complete that first report.
Right.
And then timelines are then started or kicked off to when they need to do repairs if they're needed, and then when they need to do a re-report, a reissuance of a final report,
Right.
an all-clean report. From a nationwide statewide standpoint, deadline is also an issue at the moment because the initial deadline is December of this year for all buildings that are 30 years or older.
For phase 1?
For phase 1, yes.
Want to repeat that. The deadline is to do the structural integrity reserve study. The
Yes.
deadline is this year.
And the structural milestone inspection for buildings that are 30
years or
Phase
more.
1.
Yes.
Wow.
So how many are actually going to phase 2 from phase 1? All of them?
It depends on the findings in phase 1.
Right,
Phase
exactly.
1 essentially determines if you need a phase 2 or not.
Let's talk about that as a matter of fact. So condominiums have to go through this mandatory phase 1 throughout the state. They call it a phase 1. Again, a little different in Dade and Broward. Dade and Broward call them recertifications.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Correct.
Yeah, so we don't really use the phase 1, phase 2 language so much for Dade and Broward. We use them for the rest of the state.
Okay.
Dade and Broward, recertifications, right? Again, this is confusing
I'm
stuff. You know, not many people can even have this talk. You know, it's, and I don't mean this as an insult to members of boards, but a lot of people don't even realize this. Understand, you know, how popular this show is throughout the state.
Yes.
And Dade and Broward has completely different
Right.
language. So it's this, we're talking about confusing
Is that
stuff.
because Surfside fell and...
It's because Dade and Broward, and you can
Dade and
correct me
Broward
if
line.
I'm wrong, the entire state, what we learned after Surfside was that the entire state basically didn't have any qualifications, any requirements for buildings to go and even at any time see a building inspector.
Oh,
at
my
any
goodness.
time during that building's life.
That's really
Think about that.
crazy.
Except for Dade and Broward.
Oh.
Dade and Broward were smart enough to have a recertification process in place, again, that not only for structural, and electrical. The buildings collapse, unfortunately. Florida freaks out, passes a law that says, okay, we're not going to have that happen anymore. Structural inspections for everybody. Would you generally agree?
Generally agree.
Generally agree with what I
The
just said.
Surfside
Okay.
building was going through its 30-year inspection, correct?
I don't know if they were going through it at the time. They were definitely going through an inspection that they
Okay.
went through in 2018.
Okay.
And if they had listened to that inspection in 2018, we wouldn't have had the tragedy that we had, but it was 3 years later and the building still wasn't fixed. But going off topic here for a little bit, let's go back to the phase one and phase two. Tell everybody what the difference is between a phase one and a phase two.
Sure. So a phase one inspection is essentially a visual only inspection, specifically visually assessing structural elements of a building. These are your columns, beams, slabs,
Right.
load-bearing walls, foundations, so on and so forth. And what we're looking for here is what the statute calls substantial structural deterioration.
Okay.
Now, within the phase one report, if what could happen is a visual inspection is done, no substantial structural deterioration is found, your professional will then prepare a report and send it off to the building official.
I guess what we didn't mention is, when does the buildings have to go through this initial phase one inspection?
So at the statute and the subsequent statute state that when the building reaches the age of 30 years, and then there is a slight caveat in which it leaves it up to the building officials to determine if a building needs it at 25 years.
Right.
And it's due to environmental conditions or
By the water, for example.
Yes.
So those buildings that are by the water that are listening, it's not 30 for you necessarily. It could be
Not
25.
necessarily, yes.
Right.
So the first statute dictated that it is 25 for 3 years within, but they squashed that and they left it up to the building official
official.
to determine if it's going to
okay.
be 25. So I would wait until you hear, or reach out to your building official and see if you're at 25 or if you're at 30.
And if you are, heads up, because there's an inspection coming to you.
Yes,
No doubt about it.
absolutely.
Okay, so the first one, like you just said, is a visual inspection. And a lot of the condos that are listening today are certainly at that 25 or year mark. Realistically, though, they go through this phase one inspection. Is it possible that after 25 or 30 years that they're not going to require a phase two?
It's possible, and I've had a few buildings, and in my opinion, it directly correlates to how well the building's maintained. That
right,
speaks,
sure,
yeah, that speaks
sure.
to whether they need a phase two or not.
Yeah. I mean, when I taught this new law now, I kind of make it a point that's, if I'm doing the phase one inspection and the building hasn't been repaired, you've done doing the work and doing the phase one, they know that the building basically hasn't been kept up. You'd have to be crazy to say that the building doesn't require a phase two. A lot of liability on that person.
Yeah.
Who if they don't recommend a phase two. But it's
Absolutely.
possible if you've done your homework and you see that the building's kept up.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we know that if the phase two inspection is required, the associations are going to be concerned that the engineer is going to find, a million different things wrong with the condo and potentially bankrupt the owners, right? So how important is it that the company doing the phase one can also do the phase two?
Oh.
Absolutely, and the first part where the association concerns, they're valid. I understand those. Luckily, with the way the statute's written, it hones in on what the scope is.
Okay.
We're not looking at surface imperfections. We're not looking at building code compliance or fire safety code compliance. We're looking for substantial issues,
Right,
substantial
okay.
structural issues.
Right.
And as far as the importance of having a professional capable of performing the phase one and phase two, it essentially saves the association time in which if you have a different engineer for phase one and phase two, it makes it a little difficult for the phase two engineer to go off the findings of a phase one.
Of a phase one.
Yeah.
So the obvious question is, Rimkus can handle the phase one and phase two.
Absolutely, and my recommendations is at the very least find yourself a professional that can perform both the phase one and phase two, and then to go beyond that is find a turnkey professional firm that can go beyond the milestone requirements and actually prepare plans and specs and do the bidding, do the construction and contract administration. It's that way it's a one-stop shop.
And that's what Rimkus does.
That's in your wheelhouse. I mean,
Yes,
that's what you do,
absolutely.
of course.